right. The other thing in the debates, and then I'll leave the debates behind, the issue of American citizens, this impacts us in Arizona. People take buses down to the border, to cross the border to buy prescription medications, Canada, and so on and so forth. The question came up, and as far as I know, there was only one physician on the panel and one person who has understood the economics of these sorts of things and why this stuff happens about, you can get it was a citizen, in fact, in New Hampshire said, hey, my buddy finds that he can go to Spain or wherever and get his prescriptions filled, and it pays for his trip, the money he saves. And they asked a bunch of the other candidates, but they didn't think to ask you. What would your answer have been?
Well, I certainly think that you have the right to spend your money the way you want, which means that if there's a better deal across the border, you have the right to go down there and buy medications. It's economically a little more complex than that because all governments are involved in government medicine. Our government, as well as Mexico and Canada, they are more socialized. They buy medicines in bulk, and they get discounts, and then the companies then have to make up for the money they need for R&D, and there's a group of people in this country who are not yet in the government system, so they get gouged. If you happen to be lucky enough to get the insurance, you might get medications like they do in Canada, but if you don't have insurance or not a good policy and you're trying to pay away, you might get charged 10 times as much, for the medications. So I think it's perfectly all right under the rules of freedom of choice that you can go buy it, and it'll help equalize things. You say, well, you're really getting an indirect subsidies from the government down there, but that your ability to go down there and buy drugs and medications helps to iron these problems out. But we're so far from the free market pricing of medications that until we revamp this, we're going to continue to see problems like this. And now that everybody's recognizing it's a problem, there's a strong call, especially by liberal Democrats. Well, what we need is one payer. We need it totally socialized. Today, we have a form of intervention which lends itself to even a fascist system where there's a collusion of big drug companies and medical care companies in bed with the government, and so much of the money is going to the profits of these corporations. And medicine should be, between doctor and patients. That's where most of the money should be going back and forth with insurance available for catastrophic illnesses. But we're so far from that, and unfortunately we're not going in the right direction.
In fact, along those lines, would you clarify for a moment, then we will go to the phones, 602-277-KFNX. Would you clarify for a moment the difference between a free economy and what I heard you the other day call it corporatism?
Yeah, there's a big difference. In a free market economy, we shouldn't be embarrassed or write laws or overly tax those people who provide great services for consumers. The consumers are king in a free market, and they vote by every penny they spend. If you provide a good service, you get rewarded, you make profits, and you shouldn't be taxed just because you're making profits. Give Bill Gates the benefit of the doubt. I think he's a free market person. He provides a great service. He doesn't depend on government contracts. So he shouldn't be a blame. He's true free market capitalism. But if you take a company like Halliburton, something like who depends maybe 90% of the time on government contracts, in the military-industrial complex, or go in and get no-bid contracts going into help in Katrina. It's corporatism. They're in bed with the government, and they make profits off the taxpayers, and their services usually don't come up to speed. And there's always there's more corruption under those circumstances and more waste. So I think there's a big difference if you're making profits when you're getting benefits and special privileges from the government.
Congressman Ron Paul here on the Charles Goyette Show. Let's go to the phones at 277-5369 this morning. Russ in Scottsdale's first in line. Hey, Russ.
Good morning, gentlemen. I have a question or more of an observation for the Congressman Charles. He and the so-called second-tier candidates have this catch-22 problem.
Yeah.
And, of course, you know what I'm talking about. It's you're second tier because you don't get the exposure, but you can't get the exposure, and vice versa. So here's my recommendation to you. The next debate where they're obviously, avoiding you, and you're not getting any questions for 15, 20 minutes, just kind of walk into the audience, sit down, and say, well, look, I came here under the idea that this is going to be fair and balanced, and when you include me in the debate, I'll be more than happy to come back on the stage and start answering questions.
Well, it would be dramatic for the moment, but I probably wouldn't end up with more time. But, boy, I understand your frustration. I'm the one that's standing up there waiting and waving my arms, and frustrated as no end on that issue on the nuclear first strike. I was waving my arms and couldn't get their attention, wasn't able to answer that until 30 or 40 minutes later when he asked another question. But yeah, something like that might be dramatic enough, but I'm not sure it'll be lasting. I think I try to look at this, not worrying from minute to minute how unfairly they treat certain candidates, but I see the internet as the real equalizer. If you do very, very well, you can reach a lot of people, but then again, that's not the final answer. Eventually, you do have to break into the polls, and you have to break into the major media, and I just have to work with the tools that we have. But interesting suggestion you have.
Thank you very much, Russ. By the way, speaking of the polls and so on, I would like to point out for what it is worth, second tier, you can say second tier, and to the guys in the first tier, the guys the media loves, and even on the stage for the debates, they cluster them all together so one camera can get them all. It's Giuliani and McCain and Mitt Romney. But here is the latest poll out of New Hampshire of the announced candidates, of the guys that are in the race in the second tier, except for the big three the media loves. Ron Paul is the lead. I mean, Ron Paul polls higher than Brownback, Huckabee, who's he, any of the others. Matter of fact, guys like Duncan Hunter, Virginia Governor Jim Gilmore, Tommy Thompson, they don't even show. So anyway, that's for what it's worth.
Well, that's good news. I hadn't seen that one. That's pretty good to me.
Yep. John in Phoenix, you're on with Ron Paul.
Congressman, why shouldn't Iran have nuclear power plants and even nuclear weapons if they wanted them? And I'd like you to comment on when Israel destroyed the nuclear power plant in Iraq years ago with all American equipment.
You're right, and that's why we get blamed for things like that. We're still blamed for getting rid of Mossadegh in '53. We're blamed for Saddam Hussein, who was our ally, invading Iran. If you were going to accept the notion, which I do not, of international world government, why don't you treat all the Middle East the same way? Denuclearize it. Nobody has their weapons, which would mean Israel doesn't have it. Of course, that would never be suggested. I think your first suggestion is correct. Under the treaty that the Iranians signed, they have the right to enrich for peaceful purposes, and nobody has proven that they've done anything else. They do. But even the question you raised, do they have a right to a nuclear weapon if they hadn't signed onto that treaty? Well, Pakistan has them, and India has them. As a matter of fact, I think that's neutralized the conflict of their Pakistan was always vulnerable to India. Now they have a weapon that can defend themselves. We give these countries every incentive in the world to get a nuclear weapon because we reward them with respect and usually money. The Pakistani has the weapon, we give them money. The North Koreans had a little explosion, so we're over there giving away, some of our edge too and giving them money. So we stood down the Soviets. They had 40,000 of these weapons, and we survived the Cold War. So I don't think we should be hysterical over the possibility and the vague possibility that the Iranians might get a nuclear weapon 10 years from now.
All right, one more on the phone. Michael is next. Michael?
All right, thanks, Charles. Dr. Paul, it's a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you.
I'm definitely looking forward to voting for you, and if you're not able to get the Republican nomination, I certainly hope you run as an independent. Here's a suggestion that I have that might help spread the message more, and maybe you're already onto it, but perhaps the website YouTube, where you could host a number of, short clips, so people can actually see and hear more of what you're really about, because it's certainly a popular website with a lot of people and using the internet. People, when they hear your message, they like it. I know when you go around Phoenix, you'll see homemade signs all over saying Ron Paul Revolution, and I certainly don't see that kind of stuff going on for Giuliani or Obama or anyone else out there.
Congressman, it's true. You've set some armies marching.
Well, that's good. I'm glad they're interested. And we do a lot on YouTube, but I don't know whether they're doing exactly what he suggested, but we can look into that. But there's so many of the websites now that are participating. Every day it seems like somebody has a new twist to it. But the more we're out there and more we use it, the better off we'll all be.
All right, Congressman, thank you very much for your time. Congratulations. You've been doing just a magnificent job, and we knew that you would.
Thanks a lot.
All right,
Bye.
Congressman Ron Paul. For Anti-War Radio on antiwar.com, I'm Charles Goyette.